Okay. He discovered in AA meetings the kind of sincere and even selfless fellow feeling that was often absent in synagogues. Andrew Heinz wrote in a 1999 profile of Rabbi Twerski for Judaism, the quarterly magazine of the American Jewish Congress. He was moved by the example of men and women who would willingly be awakened in the middle of the night to go out and help a fellow alcoholic. He saw no contradiction between the 12 steps and his beliefs in the laws of Torah. According to his granddaughter, the 12 steps may have been created by Christian believers, she said, but it was about spirituality, surrendering to a higher power, and that is synonymous with Judaism. Rabbi Twerski melded an eclectic menu of treatments in his work as director of psychiatry at St. Francis Hospital in Pittsburgh. The Gateway Rehabilitation Center, which we'll see the work they do there, which he founded, was named one of the top 12 rehabilitation clinics in the United States by Forbes magazine in 1987. He also wrote 80 books.
Wow.
Many on Jewish topics. It's
wow.
phenomenal. So he wrote 80 books, many on Jewish topics, but many others on addictive thinking and the addictive personality, all of which enhanced his international reputation as an authority on addiction. He died on January 31st at a hospital in Jerusalem, the city where he had lived full time for the past 5 years. So he did a lot of work in Pittsburgh, and then he said that and encouraged others to move to, we should live in Israel, and he encouraged others to move to Israel as he did towards the end of his life. 90s. A grandson, Chaim Twerski, said the cause was complications of COVID-19. So this is a fun anecdote that they include in the obituary. A devotee of the comic strip Peanuts, Rabbi Twerski sought out its creator, Charles M. Schulz, in an attempt to broaden people's thinking about issues like alcoholism and psychology. Their collaboration resulted in a series of self-help books illustrated with pictures of Snoopy, Charlie Brown, and other Peanuts characters, with titles such as Waking Up Just in Time. A therapist shows how to use the 12-step approach to life's up and downs. And what distinguished Rabbi Twerski from many other Orthodox therapists was his willingness to look outside his community. In one of his works, The Shame Born in Silence, Spouse Abuse in the Jewish Community, he called attention to a problem that many Hasidic leaders argued should be handled discreetly within the insular community without informing the police or outside authorities. Abraham Joshua Heschel Twerski, okay, also a fascinating name. There's an interview with his younger brother about Rabbi Twerski, Rabbi Dr. Twerski, and he calls him Shui, or not Shui. It's a nickname for Joshua. He was saying, I didn't refer to him as Abraham. He had a nickname, and that's how we called him. He was born on October 6, 1930 in Milwaukee, where his parents had immigrated in 1927 after leaving Russia. His father, the sixth generation descendant of the Grand Rabbi of Chernobyl, was the rabbi of Beth Yehuda Synagogue in Milwaukee, and his mother, Devorah Leah Halberstam Twerski, was the daughter of the Grand Rabbi of Bobov, one of the largest Hasidic sects. So great lineage linked to him. He's the third of 5 brothers, each of whom became a rabbi, but was given an advanced secular education as well, earning college and graduate degrees, something few Hasidim strive for. He attended public schools in Milwaukee. He acted in a Christmas play, and when his mother visited the school, the principal thought she was there to complain. Instead, she told the principal that if her son's Jewish upbringing was not strong enough to weather a second-grade play, it was his family that had failed him. A fascinating background.
Totally.
And you can see the broadness of his parents' thought as well. Even as he's raised by these inheritors of great Hasidic dynasties, they also thought openly. Wow. He received his rabbinic ordination in 1951 through the Hebrew Theological College in Chicago. Okay, shout out to Chicago, now in Skokie. While working with his father's synagogue as an assistant rabbi, he relished counseling others, but realized that the members of the congregation would always turn to his father for advice about their most intimate personal problems. He decided that by studying psychiatry, he might enhance his own talent. Right? He went to medical school so that he could be a rabbi, a better rabbi. He received his medical degree at Marquette University in Milwaukee, a Jesuit institution. He trained as a psychiatrist at the University of Pittsburgh. He was supposed to take up a teaching position at the university, but after someone told him of the hospital's need for a stronger mental health program, he became the director of psychiatry and was there for 20 years. At the time, St. Francis might house 30 patients for alcoholism. but he felt the hospital needed a longer term clinic, and that's what he built. He was drawn to the idea of helping addicts promptly stop drinking or abusing drugs, and we're going to see a quote on this as well, in contrast to the more classic psychoanalytic approach of having them explore the roots of their need for those substances. He found this tougher approach accorded with the orthodox approach to combating the evil inclination, right? He treated it as like the Yetzer Hara, right? Don't go to the roots of it. You have to fight it face on, while undergoing longer term therapy and psychoanalytic process. But he applied other approaches as well, relying on what he felt the individual could tolerate. He's survived by his wife, Gail Twerski, a psychologist, 4 children, 2 brothers, Aaron, a professor of law at Brooklyn Law School. I don't know how to pronounce his brother's name, whether it's Michelle or Michael, but he's the grand rabbi of the Horno-Stipler Hasidim of Milwaukee. So that's who the interview is with. So you can find it on YouTube. He talks about his brother, growing up with his brother. And 28 grandchildren, dozens of great-grandchildren. His first wife died of cancer in 1995. Yeah, and it's interesting how he picked up on this obituary picks up on his relationship with Charles Schultz. But he said his work was working with Charles Schultz was a particular highlight of his writing career, though he noted in 1999 that Mr. Schultz denied that there was anything particularly psychological about peanuts. I've often talked with Schultz, he said, and I've pointed out to him the insights in his strip. And he said to me, if I saw in my strips everything that you see, I would be paralyzed and unable to draw. Right, so someone who could see humor in things and sought out broader culture, was deeply educated and advanced in his field, but saw it all in service of God and in service of Judaism. So I wanted to highlight a few things about him, and then there are some of his core teachings, which again I think are so much more powerful actually coming from him. Hopefully I'll be able to share video as we go on. Okay, so integrating the 12 steps in Judaism. So this is from the article by Andrew Hines, quoted in a Wikipedia entry on Rabbi Twerski, and his attraction to the 12 steps. Okay, the significance of the religious dynamic in Alcoholics Anonymous was captured in Avraham Twerski's comment that he discovered in AA meetings the kind of sincere and even selfless fellow feeling that's absent from synagogues. He was moved by men and women. So here's the continuation of the quote that we haven't seen yet. He was moved by the example of men and women who would willingly be awakened in the middle of the night to go out and help a fellow alcoholic. Recovering alcoholics, Twerski observed, will often exhibit a sense of responsibility far superior to that of the non-alcoholic in relationship to their families, friends, and God. So he found deep spirituality in treating people battling alcoholism, that they had this deeper sense of responsibility. He was attracted as well by the pragmatism of the 12 steps. The AA system offered a practical, non-analytic therapy that resonated with traditional Judaism much more than conventional psychoanalysis did. In treating addicts, Twerski discovered limitations of the psychoanalytic emphasis on understanding the origins of one's behavior. Patients would continue to drink while they inquired with their therapists into the possible reasons for their drinking. And the 12-step program took the opposite approach, demanding that the person start his or her transformation by stopping the bad behavior. And here's our direct quote. There's an important similarity between the Torah approach to behavior and the 12-step program, Twerski realized. One does not enter into a discussion or argument with the Yetzer Hara, with the evil inclination. Whatever reasons you can propose for one position, the Yetzer Hara will give you several logical reasons to the contrary. Right, so that's just a fascinating way of him integrating his Jewish background into his methodology for treatment. Heinz gives the following example of how Rabbi Twerski introduced the 12 steps, a movement with Christian origins, to the Jewish audience. Twerski cleverly presents the theme of alcoholism not as a modern American phenomenon, but rather as a part and parcel of rabbinic discourse. He refers to Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz, who cites the Midrash Tanchuma, the Midrash on the Torah, on the drunken man whose family escorts him to witness an obviously drunk and degraded man. To his family's dismay, he bends over the fallen man and whispers in his ear, "My good man, where did you get such fine wine?" To those who would claim that the problem of addictive behavior is secondary or even peripheral to the observant Jew, Twerski answers, quote, one cannot consider oneself to be truly observant if one neglects musar. And we see, and for Twerski, musar entails dealing with the psychological mechanism of denial, which can blind a person to even the most obvious self-destructive behavior. So many of the videos that are further on this source sheet, just below this, talk about different attributes and character traits, which are prominent in the practice of musar, where we, musar is like Torah study for the personality, right? Isolating certain traits and working on them as if doing a practice of improving your knowledge of a certain sugya, a certain area of Talmud or halacha, right? You take one and you focus on it, and you dissect it and figure out how to reach the pinnacle of that character trait, how to live in such a way that refines your character traits. And he intertwines Musar study into and Musar talk into how he talks about psychiatry and obviously about Torah, but also about treatment, right, and living an integrated life. So Rabbi Twerski's reinterpretation of musar depends fundamentally on psychological categories, in spite of his rejection of psychoanalysis as a therapeutic tool. So, but he merges the two things, right? He comes from this background of musar, and which is somewhat related to Hasidism, and he combines it with his psychological approach. So Heinz writes about Rabbi Twerski: much as it's impossible for a psychologist to ignore or overlook obvious psychological problems, so Twerski's training in the biochemistry of the brain inevitably led him to abandon the strict and often austere moral economy of traditional musar. He cannot simply exhort in the ancestral way about human laziness, right? So, take for example the quality of laziness, which is one of the things studied in musar, right? You can't just say, well, don't do it, that's evil, right? So if a person seems incapacitated by depression, Twerski must investigate the possibility of a biochemical problem before resorting to the conventional prescription of musar, the performance of mitzvot, right? So it's not just, okay, you're struggling, get closer to God, do mitzvot. It's integrated with the knowledge that, right, there is a biochemical basis for depression, for example, that might be at the core of what's causing someone to not be able to be motivated. And further, Heinz writes, and he's quoting Rabbi Twerski: in my earlier days of doing psychotherapy, treating persons with a negative self-image was most distressing. And we have a clip on this further on. Twerski recalled, I would become angry because it seemed to me that the patient preferred to wallow in the mire of his fantasied worthlessness. So it's interesting to see his process of how he developed as a psychiatrist. The trick in therapy, he concluded, using the English equivalent of the word musar, employed tahbula to describe both the evil urge and methods to defeat it, is to remove the distortion of view that hindered psychological and moral growth. So that's how he would approach his therapy, in the same way he took this approach from musar, right, to describe the evil urge and the methods to defeat it in order to see it more clearly, removing the distortion against psychological terms framed with a Jewish musar approach. So starting out with an old-fashioned moralism that emphasized the stubborn will as chief stumbling block to self-improvement, Twerski ended up with the premise that psychological blocks were essentially involuntary and therefore tantamount to physical disabilities, albeit ones subject to remedy. So I find that approach to be, again, just an example of integration of two worlds, of being deeply, deeply rooted in the world of musar, of chassidut, of Jewish concepts of self-improvement, but also seeing the human being clearly and understanding the scientific and biological bases for people's behaviors, and using that approach to address his patient's needs. So we mentioned the Gateway Rehab Center, so that he founded. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. And there's I put a link here on the source sheet to the website, and it's part of their, this is from their article, Honoring the Life of Rabbi Dr. Avraham Twerski. Okay, so the Gateway Rehab brand origin can be traced back to 1965, when Dr. Avraham Twerski had a vision of a nursing home for alcoholics. And by that, I think he means that, again, a more holistic treatment, right, of the person, of tending to all of their needs, and seeing them as a whole person and not just someone with an alcohol problem. Okay, so here's about the Gateway Center. And if anyone here has actually, the first time I heard about the Gateway Center, I think, was in my work with Jax, again, in my chaplaincy experience and my internship. I encountered this organization called Jax. That is, if I can pull up the acronym just a second. But it's a Jewish group for treatment of alcoholism and other forms of addiction with a Jewish approach. And they have Shabbatonim, they have like Jewish communal events, Shabbatot, that they organize that for people to spend in community. Okay, so there are other acronyms for Jax. This, I don't know if someone can pull it up. Have people heard of this organization before?
I don't think so. No.
I remember, so my chaplaincy mentor encouraged me to go to their events just to see how they spoke and the way that they approached, right, this has a Jewish problem as well, right, that it's not outside the realm of Judaism. It's Jewish alcoholics, chemically dependent persons, and significant others. That's Jax. Just their little blurb. It's a mutual support network to help individuals of Jewish faith struggling with substance abuse overcome addiction in conjunction with Judaism. So this that's how I heard about the Gateway Center. Okay, so the short description of the Gateway Center and its work. There's lots more on its website. It's a beautiful tribute to Rabbi Twerski and people giving personal anecdotes of how he impacted their lives and his interactions with them, his treatment of them, how he changed them and saved them. So in 1970, ground was broken for a 100-bed residential treatment facility. The Gateway Rehabilitation Center's first patient was admitted on January 2nd, 1972. At the time, most commercial healthcare insurance did not cover drug addiction treatment. So the center was off to a rocky financial start. And despite repeated threats of foreclosure, Twerski credits CEO Ken Ramsey, MD, and a dedicated board of directors with keeping the doors open, right? So that's something you can tell he was fervently dedicated to, especially if it got off to a rocky financial start, right? This was part of his vision, that Jewish people should have a place to seek treatment as a whole person. But it's not only for Jews. Today, Gateway Rehab has grown into a rehabilitation treatment system that spans 22 locations, serving some 1,700 patients daily. And in 2001, he became the emeritus medical director. Under his guidance, it's grown to provide an expanding range of services to young people and their families. In 2012, Gateway Rehab rededicated its 75,000 square foot space. And its facility is known as Abe's Place in honor of the organization's founder, Avraham J. Twerski, a man with a vision. So now I wanted to, so that's some of his work, just the tip of the iceberg, and you can imagine all the, right, you just read some of the anecdotes of the people that he impacted. Take a look at that website. I encourage you to do that after the class tonight. It's also inspirational just personally, right, to see the impact of one person, right, of really definitely researching Rabbi Dr. Avraham Twerski. I felt that there's a lot to do in the world, and inspired that one man could do so much. All right. I'm curious if there's anything that's gonna, if any of you have pulled up the source sheet, if any of these particularly speak to you. I pulled up topics on Rabbi Twerski on being Jewish. These are all like, one of these is a longer lecture, but I was going to listen to the first 3 minutes or so. There's Rabbi Twerski on being Jewish, Rabbi Twerski on happiness. So again, a lot of these topics are kind of like Musar topics. It feels like I'm reading a Musar book, but it's coming from Rabbi Twerski, and if you read his books, it's like that. It's going through actually. This was an odd experience. All of these are from a YouTube account that has a long playlist of his small talks on different topics. And going through the YouTube comments, it was actually YouTube comment sections are usually terrible, like terrible places to live. But there were many comments that said, "I'm not Jewish, but listening to him feels like I'm hearing what I've needed to hear all my life, and he's speaking to my soul, and I feel like things can be okay because of what he said. And the comment section are full of comments like that, which is really an interesting phenomenon for YouTube, especially on a Jewish account, right? On someone who's so visibly Jewish, for people to say, wow, like this person is wise and has an impact on me. So Rabbi Twerski on stress and growth, on self-esteem. He talks a lot about self-esteem as the basis for success, as the basis for successful relationships, and knowing the self, knowing your worth, and working on that is like a basis for anything. Rabbi Twerski on anger. So let's take a look at some of these clips. I'll see if they play for you. Is there anyone that's jumping out to anyone here that you'd want to hear first? Have anyone here have you had exposure to Musar?
Yes.
Okay. Anyone else?
No, but if he speaks a lot about self-esteem, if you're going to play one, why don't you play one of those?
Okay, sure. That's still part of the longer lecture, and there's lots more on it. So let's. Okay, here's my self-esteem clip. Okay, so there's a clip on purpose in the world, and then a longer lecture on self-esteem. So it's what they're related. You'll let me know if you can hear it, and if not, I don't know. We'll see what we do.
I think it's important for a person.
Okay. Do I have to share sound?
I think it's important for a person, in order to have a feeling of self-worth and a feeling of self-esteem, to have a purpose in life. Living a purposeless life, so what kind of significance is that, right?
Can you hear?
Yes.
Okay.
And tell the story of two vagrants who were arrested for loitering, right? And the judge asked one guy, "What were you doing when you were arrested?" He says, "Nothing." He asked the other one, "What were you doing when you were arrested?" He says, "I was helping him." If you're helping somebody who is doing nothing, you're doing nothing, right? And I think if we have this kind of domino thing where everybody's helping everybody else, but nobody has an idea of what it's for. So I think we have to have a sense of purpose. And this may be where religion comes in, that religion says, no, the world wasn't a big accident. It was created for a purpose. And if you don't know what that purpose is, investigate, right? Look for a purpose in life. A purpose of the world and a purpose for yourself in the world. Because otherwise, to feel purposeless, my example is this. What kind of things have value to us? I tell people, go home and look at what kind of things you own. Right? There are some things that are aesthetic, ornamental. They have no function, but they're ornamental. And there are some things that have a function, and their value is in their function. Okay. You have a beautiful grandfather clock, right? It stops working, it can't be repaired. You keep it there because it's a beautiful piece of furniture, right? It's ornamental, it's attractive. You have a can opener that goes dull. It's not ornamental, you throw it away. Okay. Ornamental, aesthetic, versus function. Those are the only two criteria for value. Okay. What about me? Ornamental? Yeah. I look in the mirror and I realize, no, not ornamental. Right? Well, my value then has to be on function. Well, what is my function? Is my function coming home from work, kicking off my shoes, putting on the slippers, sitting in front of the TV with a 6-can of beer? You know, that's not a function that can make anybody proud of being who one is. So I think that in order to get a good sense of self-worth, and by the way, to give it to our children also, we have a purpose. What is my purpose in life? And within the family, what does this family stand for? If we look for purpose, right? There was a very great rabbi who says, the looking is the finding, right? Search, yeah, it's not a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, right? But as you search, you develop your traits, you develop your skills, you develop your philosophy of life. Begin to search. Too many people don't search. Everything is taken for granted. This is the way the world is. So I think that we have to search for purpose. Many people will find a humanistic purpose. My purpose in life is of trying to make life better for others. My purpose in life is trying to do something about the environment, right? To avoid acid rain, whatever. Okay. My purpose in life is trying to do something about famine in Ethiopia. You can find a purpose, but you have to look for a purpose. Too often, people just go along, traveling along from day to day without giving any thought into purpose.
Brilliant.
Okay. He talks similarly about happiness. When he talks about finding purpose and being aligned with purpose. So I'll play that clip next.
I believe that happiness is self-fulfillment. I believe that if a person neglects fulfilling any capacity and trait that he has, there's an inherent feeling of unhappiness. If a person is gifted artistically and doesn't express it, if he is gifted musically and doesn't express it, he's neglecting part of himself, right? And is not fulfilling oneself. And if we took the effort to realize what we really are, the strength and the capacities that we have, the wonderful traits that we have, and develop them to the fullest, then we will be happy. And it's not going to depend on how much money we got, and what kind of automobile we got, or how many luxury homes we have.
Right, happiness is self-fulfillment. Actually, right, and again, the emphasis on the whole self. If you're aligned with the things that are inside you, that you're uniquely suited to do, that you're drawn towards, and you're able to express that in the world, that'll breed happiness. Okay. On being Jewish, so it's not only about your own self-fulfillment. He also talks about belonging in a larger sense, and in this clip, he talks about why be Jewish for Jewish people, and it's a familiar claim which I've heard in other places. I don't know if it's unique to him, but it's a strong claim that, right, if this is your toolbox, your language that you were born into, right, why would I express myself, my uniqueness, my talents? Why would I give that to the Jewish community and live my life through the Jewish community? It's because, well, that's your language, right? That's the toolbox you were born with. That's the right. You use what you're given to express yourself. And he obviously says it a little more eloquently than that. So,
an identity also requires some belonging, right? You have to belong somewhere. I was born into a Jewish family. I belong to the Jewish nation. Now, it so happens that part of my upbringing was such, with a belief in God and belief in Torah, and okay. But there's some people who may not have that orientation, but they have to realize you can't live without belonging somewhere. And belonging to the Republican Party or the Democratic Party isn't enough. I've seen kids go into drugs because they wanted to belong with the druggies, right? I've seen people go into gangs to have an identity. I've seen people commit crimes, right? In order to have an identity. I'm a criminal, right? What am I? I've got to be something, right? So I think that a person born into Jewish family should, first of all, investigate what does Jewishness have to offer. There are things that he may find that displeases him. That's fine. But too many people cast it away, and they say it's an obsolete religion. There's no reason for all of these rituals, et cetera, and some run off to the Orient to find something over there, right? Without having looked in their own backyards for it. Okay? Now, you know the famous story with the person who had a dream. He had a dream that under the bridge in Prague, there was a buried treasure. He was living in a little hut in some town in Russia. And he told his wife, I've had this dream again and again. I got to go for that treasure. She said, what, are you crazy? Got to follow a dream? Anyway, he couldn't get it out of his system, so he finally went to Prague. But he couldn't dig under the bridge because the guards were all, the police were around. But he hung around there, and finally one of the policemen says to him, what are you doing hanging around here all the time? He said, look, I'll tell you the truth. I've had this dream that there's a treasure buried under there. He said, you believe in those dreams? I've had a repeated dream that in a little village in Russia, there's this little hut, and there's this treasure buried under that. That's this guy's where this guy lived, right? So he went back to his house, and he dug up the house, and he found the treasure in his own house. And the moral of the story is, you can always think that the treasure is someplace else. The treasure is right within you, right? But you have to look for it. And I think when people run off to the Orient to find exotic religions, before they've had a chance to investigate what is their birthright, what did they inherit from their, what is their heritage, I think it's a serious mistake. Right? Now, if they've investigated and then decided that they want some other religion, I can't agree with that, but I understand what they did. But 99% of people have never even given any serious thought to the wealth of wisdom that there is in Jewishness, to the wealth of spirituality that there is in Jewishness.
I don't know, I found it kind of remarkable that he's even open to the idea that, you know, then people are exploring, right? They should, you know, it's okay. Like people do explore, that's fine, but they should investigate thoroughly first in their own religion, in their own backyard, and dig deep there. And we have all right, and that's come right. That came through in his own work, right? Of saying I'm an expert in, right? He was known as a foremost expert in addiction, and I can find teachings on addiction or teachings on other kinds of mental illness in the Jewish tradition, and there's wisdom to be mined there if only you look for it. And he's a living exemplar of that. This famous teaching on growth, but why don't I play one more clip about self-esteem, and this is a longer lecture, but I can play the first 3 minutes for you.
Of course, which is a significant part of ourself, plus welcome to the first in a series of Self-Esteem for Success. Let me start by telling you a little bit about why I think self-esteem is important, and then we'll define it. Incidentally, I've been asked whether it's true that I've written over 50 books. I said, yes. Well, where did you find time to write 50 books? And I said, well, I've never written 50 books. I've written one book in 50 different ways. Because everything that I've written is related to self-esteem, and some people will say I'm obsessed with the topic of self-esteem, and that's a legitimate criticism. But I think I have a right to that position because self-esteem for success, self-esteem for happiness, self-esteem is probably the single most important factor in our lives. And the reason for that is this. When we see something, we assume that it is there. We don't feel that we are hallucinating. Now, if I have a vision, a perspective of something, so that is its reality. And if I have a perspective of myself and a concept of myself, well, that is my reality, and it's a very important part of my reality. And if my perception of myself is that I am in some way inferior, inadequate, incompetent, anything negative, if that's my perception of myself, then that's my reality, and I believe that anyone who looks at me is going to see what I believe is there. So if I think about myself as being inadequate, inferior, incompetent, I am certain that everyone who looks at me is going to see me that way, and I am going to relate to the world in that way. And I think you can see from there on the appropriateness of the title, Self-Esteem for Success. Right? Because if you have a negative opinion of yourself and you think that everybody sees you as negative, you're certainly going to have many barriers to a successful development. Now, The word esteem is, of course, related to the word estimate, right? How do you estimate something? Well, depending on what it is and how you're going to appraise its value. But if you have a home that's worth $1 million,
Okay, he goes on to talk about the word self and then the word esteem, and then he talks for another 40 minutes. So that's okay. So that's his core concept of self-esteem. He said he's written the same book 50 times over in different words, but it's all about self-esteem. And now I guess after that, he wrote another, 30 to 40 books apparently. So they must have been the same book over and over again. So that's at the basis of all of his teachings. There are a couple more videos on here on anger, and he talks about the Musar practice around anger. He kind of analyzes each phase of anger and when anger occurs, and encourages people to journal about it, to write out why they were angry, how they did each day on their anger scale, and what came up for them and why. And he's got again many videos on that. One more on stress and growth, and then there's a piece here, a quote from one of his many books. It's not as tough as you think, how to smooth out life's bumps. Because I wanted to bring that as that and another concluding piece. So I'm just gonna, so you can I guess look back at the anger piece and the stress video should you want, a little wisdom on how to deal with anger, how to deal with stress. Okay, this piece from It's Not As Tough As You Think, How to Smooth Out Life's Bumps, again, gives an example of how he incorporates Musar and Chassidut in his encounter with mental illness and his psychiatric practice. So this is what he writes. As unpleasant as solitude may be, it is surpassed by the aloneness that one feels when depressed. In this case, one tends to feel not only alone, but what is much worse, abandoned. People who may have experienced some type of abandonment in their childhood are particularly vulnerable to such feelings if they become depressed, even many decades later. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, his bringing in his Hasidic background, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov writes extensively about his depression and states that there were times when he felt he was in the deepest recesses of hell, yet he never felt abandoned. Here's the theological overlay, because he recalled the verse, "If I ascend to the heavens, you are there, and if I descend into hell, you are there too." Since there is no place bereft of God, he is everywhere, and his presence accompanies even those who are in the depths of hell. The knowledge that God was always with him banished the frightening feeling of aloneness and abandonment and gave him a modicum of comfort in his anguish. All right, so I'd be interested to hear how he actually incorporated teachings like this into his practice. I'd be curious with Jewish patients, but there we see a model of the integration, right? Of course, Rabbi Nachman speaks pretty explicitly about his battles with the Sitra Achra, the other side, darkness and sadness. And here he writes it into his work. Okay, many more videos there, but I wanted to end with one special thing, which I'm not sure is so familiar to everyone, a musical contribution from Rabbi Twerski, right? Beyond founding treatment centers and writing prolifically and teaching and inspiring and treating, Rabbi Twerski requested that at his funeral, no eulogies be recited. Rather, they should sing Hoshia es Amecha to accompany him to his burial. And probably if I say like the nigun of Hoshia es Amecha, there's one tune that comes to mind. And yes, he wrote that nigun, which is, I don't know if a tune comes to mind. Okay, I'm seeing a little, I'm curious. Well, think about Simchas Torah. But here's the story. So it's him telling the little story of him writing the nigun. It's titled Rabbi Twerski Reveals the Origin of the Famous Hoshia SMS. There's also the packaging of a lot of his videos on YouTube. Some of them are turned into like these inspirational videos, that like those kind of things that pop up on Facebook that are like, you're never alone. And when you're thinking about this, and there's like dramatic videos of actors walking around sad. or inspired and hugging, and it's just fascinating to see how his teachings, which are deeply rooted in both medicine and Jewish tradition, are then kind of packaged as the kind of like new agey teachings that people seek out today. And it's kind of comforting to know that there are these teachings out there as well that are deeply rooted, and it's not just kind of surface. It's someone who lived it, treated people, accompanied people in their suffering, and was able to speak from deep wisdom. So perhaps he's reaching a broader audience than he might have thought possible through all of these videos. That's what was my explanation of this little cute intro music. Okay. Here he is.
A song composed by Rabbi Twerski himself that the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, loved so much. The song Hoshia Samecha. Rabbi Twerski, did you compose the song Hoshia Samecha? Yes, he did. So for all those who don't think that Rabbi Twerski or they're not sure, we have verified. So let's sing Hoshia Samecha. In 1960, it was the week before my younger brother
Married,
The sound.
and I was davening, and I remember the spot that I was at.
It sounds like the sound went out. Is that true? You can still hear it. Great. I'm playing it.
In the shul, and I was davening Shachris Ha'edu, and I came to the phrase Hoshia Samecha. Right? We ask Hashem, help your people, and bless your inheritance, right? And elevate them into eternity. And as I was saying that, I started thinking to myself, the week after that, my younger brother got married, so I sang it at his wedding, and it caught on. And some people who were at the wedding went to Israel, and they brought the song to Israel, and a few weeks later, a new tune came from Israel. And this was the tune. It was a song of the Breslev Hasidim. I said, okay. Then later I heard, it's a Chabad song. Okay, what do I care? Right? I can't copyright it anyway. Right? So, but it's Baruch Hashem, it was a composition that I'm happy to have made. Okay, let's go. Samecha.
All right. I think it's well, so now that people recognize that tune. Yeah. Okay. I kind of love that origin story of, right? Like, he made it up one day. It came to him during Tefillah, and then suddenly it was this entrenched old Hasidic niggin that people were talking about, because obviously it just felt so natural and so normal, already became part of the repertoire, that had to be an old Hasidic niggin that someone came up with. So he's just another demonstration of like his broad shoulders, but his depth, and it's fascinating, right? He even wrote a nigun, right? He's a person of many contributions to the Jewish community, probably topping them all, his impact on individuals' lives with addiction, with psychiatric illnesses. But he gave so much more and gave us language, religious language for mental illness in a deep way, in a way that modern people can read, understand, access. I encourage all of you to, now I'm going to look back to these videos, maybe when I'm feeling a need for a boost or something, to inspirational words. It kind of feels like he's talking to you through the screen, and there's a big collection of his teachings that are preserved for us online. As you heard, he sounded like a very humble but very accomplished man, deeply, deeply rooted, and made very, very large contributions that continue to impact the Jewish community until today, and the broader world. So I'm going to stop the recording. People want to share thoughts, comments, reflections.